Rappin' with ReefBum is sponsored by Bulk Reef Supply and Ecotech Marine.
Hey, what's happening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Rappin' with ReefBum. I'm your host, Keith Berkelhamer. So today I welcome hobbyist Luca Martino, known as Mahina Corals on Instagram. What's happening there, Luca?
How's it going, Keith?
Pretty good, man. Pretty good. So Luca has been a reef tank hobbyist. You got me beat, man. For 36 years. You must have started quite young. Quite young. He is obsessed with pushing the understanding of the hobby, and he likes to assess certain assumptions in the hobby. His background is chemical engineering, and in his professional life, he builds, starts up, and runs pharma and food manufacturing facilities. But before we start chatting with Luca, I want to thank the sponsors of the show, both Bulk Reef Supply and Ecotech Marine. I really appreciate the support of these companies, and I appreciate the support of you folks tuning in. I say there's a whole bunch finding the stream right now. Please don't forget to spread the word and hit that like button so more people can find the stream. As always, encourage comments and questions in the chat. So Luca, man, thanks for taking some time out tonight to join me. How you doing? What's going on there?
Doing well. You know, enjoying summer, Keith, and pretty excited to be on your live stream. So yeah, just looking forward to the conversation. And I would like you to start saying "smash that like button." I love when you used to say that. Smash that like button.
All right, let's smash that like button, folks. We got almost 50 people watching right now. Only 18 likes, so smash it. Smash it.
Smash it up, guys. Share it on Instagram. Get people in here.
Yeah, for sure. So, man, we got a lot to talk about. You're pretty vocal about certain topics on reef keeping, and so we're going to kind of dig into a lot of that stuff. And but I don't know. Let's get a little bit background on you, Luca, in terms of your reef keeping journey. I mentioned you've been in the hobby for 36 years. How did it all start for you? At what age?
Yeah, so I've been keeping aquariums since I think 5.5 years old. I convinced my parents for my 6th birthday to fast forward it 6 months because I just wanted an aquarium so bad and I couldn't get paid yet. And at 11, I started working so I could buy aquarium stuff and also boom boxes and CDs. But I've been keeping everything, and then so naturally, when I was getting ready to start working in like a actual place where you got paid like real money, not cash on the side, I worked for this pet store, Pets and Things. And if you're in southern Wisconsin, northern Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, this Gary Greenwood, who owned it, was known locally, and he had amazing high-end freshwater. So he already had an RO system back in 90 whatever. He also had Reef, and he hired me, and I was deathly scared of rats and stuff. So I quickly learned a lot about the fish stuff, and he started letting me run the fish room, and I started doing all the maintenance on the saltwater and freshwater tanks. And even there, when I was there, I was talking about this crazy thing called the protein skimmer, and getting a real calibrated, I think they're called hygrometer versus the little swing arm thing. Yeah. So that's how it started, Keith. And it's always been a passion of mine. When my son was born, I built a small 29-gallon reef tank with him, and that evolved into this current 1,000-gallon system. So here we are.
Yeah, so 1,000 gallons. How many different tanks? What sizes and all that sort of thing? You've got some. You got a couple of tanks in your behind you right there, or next to you and behind you.
But here's my coralline algae covered 250.
Yeah, dude, you gotta clean the glass there, dude.
I know.
Especially on the live stream, Luca. You gotta like break out the old scraper for the live stream at least.
I know. You got me. This is this tank I actually built myself in entirety, the acrylic and everything.
Oh wow.
That's 6-footer, and then in the back fish room, I have 3.
You're not mobile. Can you give us a little tour, or are you tethered?
I can do it.
All right, let's see what happens.
All right.
Peter T, thank you so much for that super chat. Luca, where's the J-Bo shirt at?
No J-Bo shirt for me.
All right, we're gonna.
Although I do use them for Kalk slurry. All right, so
I'm sorry, man. I kind of took you off. I kind of caught you off guard, right? We didn't talk about this before the show, but you sent me some videos that were portraits, so we couldn't use those. So might as well ad lib here, right?
Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna get yelled at again. This is my 65-gallon that's covered in coralline algae. It literally is jam-packed. You can't see in there with SPS. That's my first tank that I started doing with metal halides, and that's when I got addicted to reefing. I'm sure one day the silicone's going to split on it because it's ancient. This is my 4-foot by 2-foot refugium. I harvest about 10 gallons of Kato a week. I just use old T5 bulbs, and I use a couple of my LED light bars. You can see all my T5 bulbs right there.
Oh, so what are those? Was that a cache of T5 bulbs you got there?
Yes, sir. I until I die, I'll probably have some form of T5 on something in my aquariums to make me feel okay with my life. You can see my electrical is up here, all my energy bars. I routed it through some highways that go to the tank.
Your wiring looks like my wiring. It's not pretty.
It's marginal.
Yeah.
We got our tester down there and some stuff like that. But then here's I got my 2 frag tanks right here that are on opposite photo periods right now, so they're sleeping. This is my LPS, and I stole this from Jake Adams, the Chalice Palace. I think I have 4 to 5 square foot of chalice growing in that tank right now. This is my basic SPS tank, and then this is my sump, and then my high-end SPS tank right there. And then you can see the red and white pharmaceutical bucket. That is my Kalk slurry machine. And then I do believe in big water changes, so I have a 180-gallon system that I can change. I have a Reef flow dart on there. I can change 180 gallons in 20 minutes.
What is that what you typically do? 180 gallons on a 1,000-gallon system every week? 2 weeks?
I actually try to do every 10 days is my goal.
Gotcha.
And that's it for now. I kind of forgot to tell you this, but I am building a house, and I'm going to have a 450 square foot fish room that I'm going to put into 6-foot by 12-foot grow flats, and that's where I want to take my system. Is really big, and I'm going to be obsessing about flow and the lack of detritus. So
let's talk about that, Luca, because behind you you've got this PVC array that's I guess similar design in terms of what Top Shelf Aquatics has, right? In terms of the array, and it's a great idea. How long have you been using that array?
So these corals have been in here for about 3 months, I believe, and it was a 1-day setup system. So it was holding water, and then I said a prayer, and I put it online to the system because I built the tank, and I'm like, I think I did it right. I hope it doesn't blow up. And the biggest thing I noticed is I never had hair algae. I have this little bit of a green kind of turf algae that grows on it. But the corals from day one settled in. I lost 1 out of the 50 I put in there. And from there, it's been really easy. And I have them on I call them lollipops. So my coral is, I made concrete bases. I put the coral on top with epoxy, and then that friction fits into the PVC thing. So if I see a coral that's looking weird, I'll go and dip it with ChemiClean or iodine. You get it dipped, put it back in the tank, you're good to go. So I do like the ability to kind of take them out, and you always fantasize, if I could just get to that colony and get it out, I do this and that, but it's too much work. I don't have time. I can just pull it out, dip it. So I've been farting around a lot with iodine and ChemiClean, inducing some die-off in SPS, and then seeing if I can stop it. So that's why I got to the lollipop, because if I'm going to have these huge grow flats, I need to quickly be able to save my mother colonies if something should happen, and I'm really trying to figure out what's the best way to do that at the moment.
So, yeah, and I want to ask you a couple of questions about that. Hey, what's up there, Chris from ACI Aquaculture? Yeah, Chris, I wasn't really, I wasn't understanding your comments, but yeah, putting on your glasses certainly makes a lot more sense. Now I think you're lucid in your thoughts there. What's happening, fellas? Hard to put. Yeah, okay. So, all right, man. Talk to us about the iodine and the ChemiClean. So you're using those two as dips to treat individual corals. You're not doing any, total tank types of treatments with that stuff, because I know Jake Adams, we were talking to him about ChemiClean, and my understanding is that he was treating, an entire system with that. I know Meckley has done that as well. Mm-hmm. So what's the theory behind you're assuming that there's some sort of bacterial issue with these individual corals, and that's what you're doing in terms of dipping them?
So actually listening to Chris, I'm a big fan of Chris. Hello, Chris. And a couple others, they were talking about prophylactically using ChemiClean. So I do that every 6 months for my system. I believe in it. I think it does good things. I can't quantify that. However, I know that there's people out there pushing the boundaries on, hey, I got these antibiotics and this and that and the other, and I'm going to start trying these dips. I don't have access to some of that stuff. And so I just started experimenting. I'm like, hey, why can't I use stuff I already have, iodine? And I want to be clear, guys, you don't combine the two together. So it's not iodine and ChemiClean. That's not what I'm talking about. But I found that iodine, taking these lollipops off, swishing around the iodine for 15 minutes, putting it back in 4 days later, swish it around in ChemiClean, and I do a concentration. I think it's 1 scoop per gallon, those little scoops that they come with it, 1 scoop per gallon, swish it in there, and you're freezing some of the death. And I'm not on the same page as like Kung Fu Corals or others that are really cutting edge. But Keith, I'm finding that I can stop the recession I induce RTN in some of my frags that I have multiple colonies of through, let's put it in a cold tank, or let's do something bad with it, a little bit, induce it. I can stop it, even though I'll have a control frag. That one will keep dying. This one will finally stop and stabilize. And I actually have one in here. It's not readily available, but I actually did it on purpose. And I left it in there, and it's re-encrusting now down the base.
So you're seeing some random RTN or STN types of events, and that's what's kind of motivated you to do this kind of regime that you got going on?
Yeah, I'm actually I'm just going to take out coral. I'm going to put on a frag plug, and then I'm going to put them in a tank that has alkalinity of 6 or something, or a high temperature. I'm very interested in high temperature.
So you're experimenting. You're trying to induce a reaction.
Yeah. Yes, and then I'm trying to save them. I'm trying to stop the death and prevent the whole colony, because if I can figure this out, when you have a huge colony this big of something, you've had for 4 years, I would hate to see that die.
Have you utilized the aquabiomics at all in terms of doing the bacteria testing?
So
You smile when I ask that question.
Because I love it, because you talk about it, and my previous job, we were growing probiotics, and the science is real. Okay, so I totally respect what they're doing, and I want to start doing that, Keith. It's just on the checklist of 9 million things I want to do. I was actually trying to get it done this summer. However, the build of the house is progressing faster, so I'm working on designing the fiberglass troughs, so I've been distracted. But I do believe in it, and I would like to start actually talking to them directly and ask them, how are they doing these things? Because that's my language. I would like to understand better. However, they're pioneers, and I want to support them. So at the same time, I want to start getting it tested.
Yeah, I'm going to have Eli back on the live stream, I think, in August. And I'm utilizing them for one of my systems where, when I did my whole 187-gallon tank reboot, which has been completed, by the way, and I'll have to put another video out on that in terms of the finished product. But yeah, what I'm doing with that, and I don't know what it's going to show, but what I'm trying to prove with the data is to show that I cooked the dry rock long enough to the point where I had a good enough bacteria population to classify it as live rock, and that overall in the system that I did not really lose any bacteria in the change, because I basically pulled out 127 pounds of Haitian live rock, ripped it all out, put it in a cryptic sump, which I think is something that you're talking about doing, and put in this cooked carob seed life rock. So I'm doing 3 different aquabiomic tests. I'm doing a pre-test right before I did the teardown. Then I'm actually doing a test on the 100-gallon Rubbermaid tub to see what kind of bacteria I had in that tub, and then I'm doing a post. So I should be getting the test pretty soon, hopefully this week, maybe beginning of next week, and I'll do another post test to kind of see soon after the change how things look on the bacteria front. So I'm pretty interested to see that.
Now, which one of your systems has the insane growth? Is that the new tank with the LED lights, right?
Yeah, it's I'm getting really good growth in both systems. So the LED lit tank with the GHL Mitras is definitely I got some crazy good growth. My pH in that system is 8.3 to 8.4, 8.5. So it's pretty elevated. In my other system, the one that I was just talking about, the 187-gallon tank that I just rebooted with the 2 frag tanks plumbed into it, I'm getting like I actually had to make some changes today. I'm getting the last few weeks really high elevated pH, and it's kind of scaring me. And my pH is like, the low is 8.5, the high is 8.7. So I just put in some conditions, today on my dosers to say stop dosing Kalkwasser at 8.4, because I don't like living on the edge like that. But listen, all the animals in that tank, the corals are doing fantastic, growing like crazy. But I think I asked this question of Chris Wood from Captive 8 Aquaculture when I had him on. I was like, what pH would you be alarmed about in terms of a high? And he's like, it just depends on how your corals are looking. If you're 8.6 or 8.7 and they're looking good, then I wouldn't be worried. But I don't think there was like a set answer for that. But 8.8 would certainly worry me.
And 8.3 is like kind of like some ideals that some people have because it's more closer to ocean water, maybe before humans, started changing the global CO2 concentration. I'm right now with my Calk. So Calk Slurry is a double-edged sword. You have to keep the pH high enough that the CO2 intrusion rate into your water is sufficient enough to give you the alkalinity you need. So if you keep it at 8.2, my alk would be like at 5.5. But I'm at 8.45 now, and my alk's at a perfect 8.3. So I'm actually discussing with my builder on how to control my CO2 levels in my fish room, because I have an HRV and I have a dedicated HVAC and it's sealed. I'm actually going to be tuning my alk via my CO2 levels, I believe. That's where I'm kind of trending on that. I have gone as high as 8.5 continuously. I just peg it at 8.5, so it's exactly 8.5 all the time. And I got real weird and spindly growth on my acros. I mean, I was literally growing, Keith, like my Miyagi tort was 1.5 inches a month.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It was a weird growth, but someone else's tank at 8.5 might look perfectly normal because they have different lighting, different nutrients, different flow, different traces, whatever it is. So I'm with you. I try to keep it, right now, I keep it minimum 8.42, and I cut off my calc dosing at 8.49 is where it goes. And it'll go up to about 8.52, and they'll come back down.
You're a GHL user, right? You're using the Profilux and to use the in terms of controlling your Kalkwasser additions, and you're only doing the Kalk Slurry.
So my GHL Doser, it took a saltwater bath about 2 years ago, and so I have a how do you say it? Kamer?
Oh, Kamor. Yeah.
So I have a Kamor that
peristaltic dosing pump.
Yep, and I can set the flow rate. So I got it set to 15 mils per minute. It goes to my apex, which controls off of the pH. But have you ever used an Alkatronic?
No.
Okay, so Alkatronic, GHL is a really good unit too. Alkatronic gives you a controllable outlet so not only do I have a limit on pH, if for some reason my calc slurry were to go wild, if my alk test goes above 9, it cuts power to the unit on top of that. So I have a double fail-safe. I have my pH probe control, where I have limits, and I have all my programming in my apex to do my dosing. I do a ceiling, a bottom and a top, and at the bottom it'll turn on indefinitely until it raises the pH, and at the top it'll turn off completely. And in between, I have an oscillating function in my apex. Every 15 minutes, it's running for 3 minutes, I believe, is how it goes.
You're definitely more automated than I am, or at least letting the controllers do more of that work than I do. I mean, I really had no control in terms of I didn't let any of the controllers do any of the controlling. I was doing all the controlling. So just like I was saying today, I actually just put in some upper limits on the pH because I feel like that's a safe thing for me to do, and it's not too risky. Do you worry, like, if that pH probe just kind of wigs out on you, or do you have some fail safes in place for that in terms of, like, if you do get the bad data on the pH readings, or on terms of the alkalinity from the Alkatronic?
So a couple things. Like you said, I'm a chemical engineer, so my living has been based on knowing automation will fail, and my specialty is how do I design the best systems at work so that if automation fails, I don't lose a batch of probiotics, or I don't start a fire, or whatever. So I always design all my systems assuming failure. And so, Keith, when I walk in, I didn't show it to you. I'm not going to show you a Milwaukee pH readout. However, when I go into my fish room at the end of the day after work, I pull it up and it has a pH on it. And right next to my apex, I have a Milwaukee pH unit, and I calibrate both of them with NIST certified 4, 7, and 10 standards. And so, number one, I use double junction pH probes. I believe they're the best.
Well, explain to us what a double junction pH probe is. I don't know myself.
So a single junction pH probe, if I understand this correctly, is a higher rate of failure, and it can drift more. When you have the double junction, the one junction somehow checks the other junction. And please, guys, don't quote me on this, because, again, I'm not a scientist. I'm more of an engineer. And I know in my own facilities, double junction have much longer lifetime. They're more reliable. They're resistant to shock, etc. And they're normally about twice as much as a cheap one, which is a single junction. I do know that they hold the calibration better. And you can check the health of your pH probes by checking the slope and all these things. And I'll bring my pH probes into work once in a while, and I'll have my lab just check them out to make sure the slope's still good and it can hold the calibration in the lab too. So pH is number one. Number two.
Just a quick question for you. How often do you calibrate your pH probes?
I'm right around a month, even though I know it's overkill. Because I know things are inherently going to fail. Anything mechanical is going to fail. It makes me feel better to calibrate my pH probes, calibrate your temperature probe, and that's really easy. You put ice cubes in a cup of water, because when you have ice cubes with water, when it comes to equilibrium, it'll be at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And so you can do that. And then if you have a certain type of pH probe, not a Neptune one, you can calibrate at boiling water too if you'd like. So now you have 2 points you can calibrate. But I do have, again, because I'm weird, I have a NIST calibrated grade pH probe that I do the ice water and the boiling points. And so I know that thing is dead on. And then I will use that to check my Neptune, because what I can do in my Neptune, they have a really basic calibration method. Let's say you have a calibrated temperature probe, it says 77.1, and this is reading 77.8. You can go in there and say, no, buddy, this is 77.1.
Override it.
And it just drops down, and it's close enough. So I do check my salinity, temperature, and pH multiple ways, and I do check them with NIST certified instruments. So there's some people that say, hey, get a bunch and check them. I don't believe in that. I get one that is NIST grade certified. You know, you can use it in industrial use, and I calibrate it and I use that, and that's my holy grail. I don't look at aquarium hobby level instrumentation as anything I would dare to use as my baseline. I will go buy those from Fisher Scientific, Cole Palmer, and yeah, a good temperature probe is $100, and the temperature calibration normally holds for 10 years. But if you do the boiling water and the ice water, temperature probes are linear. So if it's good here and here, most 99% of the time, it's going to be good throughout the range.
Yeah, you know, I never calibrate my temperature probes. And all the years I've been keeping reef tanks, I never ever. And temperature is important, right? I mean, temperature is a very important parameter. So, but I do have multiple temperature probes on my system, so it is kind of like, you know, my temperatures. I know what my temperatures are because you know, seasonally. Yep. and you know, in the summertime, my temperature will you know, maybe get up to 82 on the halide lit tank, and yep, 80 on the LED lit tank. So yeah, you know, I mean, what typically do you keep your temperatures at in your systems?
I'd like to make one comment. I believe you have GHL temperature.
Yeah.
So if I were to say what I would trust the most, and I'm not sponsored by GHL or anything, they're built to a different standard. So if I was going to believe in one aquarium grade, it would be the GHL. And actually, I'm thinking about switching a lot of my stuff over to GHL because I really do have a high level of respect for their quality and their quality control, which is important. Right now, I keep it at 79 as a baseline, and I let it climb about up to 82 because I'm a halide guy. There's some halides right there. 400 watt,
baby.
10,000 K, Ushio, baby. I do let it climb up to that. At the new house, I've been reading a lot of interesting, very, very interesting literature, tidbits, fragments. I wouldn't call them scientific studies. You hear this or you hear that or you read this or that above 80, so bacteria have certain temperatures they like to grow in. You have all these ecosystems interacting, and there's a possibility that keeping it above 80, 82 might be an optimum rate for growth, metabolic health, and maybe even driving some of these less desirable bacteria out. Since the science on our bacteria in our reef tanks is so infantile, I take it with a grain of salt. Some of the best tanks I've seen have been low of 80, high of 83 locally. And they do it because they don't want to air condition so much.
Are those
but they're amazing.
Halide lit tanks, or?
He switched out to LEDs, and he just
still has a high temperature.
Yeah, he just kept it up there, and his growth rates are very good. And he does not have cyano, he does not have diatoms, and he does not have the random RTN or STN from the base, really, ever. Like that's my guy I give my frags to as a secondary source because I trust them, and he never kills anything.
That's your bank.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, I want to dig into this Kalk slurry thing, and I don't want to like beat that thing to death because I know you've been talking a lot about Kalk slurry, and there's a lot of strong opinions out there about it, and we'll definitely get into that discussion. But let's talk about lighting. You mentioned middle halides, and we saw your cache of T5 bulbs, but also behind you, you've got some LEDs, and those are a brand of lights that you manufacture, right, or that you produce?
Yeah, so I sell them. They're manufactured in China. My big goal with this Lightbrand currently was to provide a blanket T5-like coverage for a price that you know is more attractive than maybe your elite models. And I have really, this is my first and only all LED tank, and I am matching my growth rates of my T5 system in the back and my halide system right here. So I spent a lot of time on the spectrums, and I do believe that every type of lighting has its place, and some spotlight lights are really good for like maybe LPS or etc. But if you look at a halide, it's not a point source like the spotlights that we have currently. It's actually multi-reflection. You're getting all these beam angles. So my thought is how can I introduce a light bar? And this is a 6-footer, which there's not many 6-footers in the industry, but I'm like, I want to make a light bar that can give you the cheapest grow operation. So you buy those 115-gallon frag flats that I showed you, those 7-foot by 3 foot. These are designed for those, because I want to, how can I help an entry aquaculturist get easy to grow light? You know, it's like the T5. I have 4 spectrums. Pick them out, put them in, you're good. There's no adjusting this, that, and the other. And then how can I make it as cheap as possible? I kind of talked to you about it. I am actually working on 100% manufactured in America. Of course, there's global components of a next-gen light bar that's going to be significantly different than anything currently on the market that's in a mass quantity in America. Okay, so looking at, you're sponsored by Ecotech, okay? I look at those Ecotech Radions, and man, what they do with those LEDs and cost, send out that beautiful blanket of light, or what your Mitras do, that beautiful blanket of light. I think there's a space for a higher end bar that can meet those needs. So that's kind of where I do this in my part-time. It's kind of my passion. Kind of like you selling coral, you know, it's something we do. I actually tried to do what you're doing, and I realized light bars don't die and they don't get cold. So I do sell local.
There's challenges with shipping live corals. Had an incident today. Thanks, UPS. But enough about that. So you're getting some kudos about your light bars, UK Reef Bro. We need the Luca bars in the UK. Rob B's Reef. I'm loving my Quantas. What else did I see here? Reef Tank Paradise with Reefer Man 720 Sean M. That's one hell of a screen name. Hey Lucas, thanks for the Luca. She should have said thanks for the lights. Work great.
That's awesome. You know, it's pretty fun. I make them for the hobbyist. I don't spend marketing dollars on them. It's working. I think the most exciting thing is I still work with every customer. And I think that's how you are, Keith. I do want to buy corals from you because you have some really cool old school stuff. But you know, working with the individual customer and then they see results, and that's very rewarding to me. So thank you guys, and you know, keep on supporting me. So I appreciate that.
Farmer Frags is asking, what drivers are you running?
For the LED bars or for my halide?
I'm assuming for the LED bars.
So I'm running. I'm pushing. I have more LEDs per foot than most bars, so I'm pushing them at the same overall current, but with more. I mean, I'm same overall voltage drive. So I'm actually pushing each LED with a little bit less current. So like this 6-foot bar is pushing a true 108 watts compared to the competition's 70 or 75. My 48-inch bar pushes a 72 watts. So a little bit higher current. The way you organize the LEDs and stuff, at the end of the day, per LED, my wattage is lower, so I can push more wattage with the same heat exchanger efficiency of standard LED light bars that are on the market.
What kind of par are those light bars cranking out?
So these, I got 5 of these 6-footers on this 6-foot by 28-inch tank, and it's basically between 420 to 540 across 85% of the tank.
Wow, it's impressive. So how did you pick the spectrums? You've got four spectrums, right? So that people can choose from. How did you come up with those spectrums? What kind of data did you base all of that off of?
So I was I started looking at the natural attenuation of sunshine in water, salt water. And, you know, I think my expectation is that the blue would go through really easily and everything else dies out. But what the research shows is at 3 meters, you still have a ton of green and orange, and you do have some red. But there's a sharp drop off. I think it's 620 nanometers light, and anything further, if you get 5 meters down, it's really getting reduced drastically. But your UV, your violet, your blue, and your green and your oranges are going to make further down. So I looked at all the current lighting on the market, and your light, that one has some UV and some violet in it, but a lot of them lack a lot of violet and maybe are more centered around 450 and 470 nanometers. And if Mr. Meckley's still on, I caught him. He was talking to Trulio from Reef Bright, and they were talking about green. My daylight bars do have green because I'm like, why aren't they in? And I get people might not look like that look, but if it's a useful wavelength for the corals, that's interesting. And if it's also the most dominant light going through the water, it seems weird not to have some of that in there. So my 4 light bars, the OG Pop is your traditional 2 blue spectrum, your 450 and your 470, make the pop. The Meso Blue is a lot more violet, and especially heavy violet, like 430 is my favorite. So my peak is 432 on that, which is about as close to an ATI Blue Plus. I'll be honest, Keith, I wanted to make the first replacement ATI Blue Plus bar, and it's damn close. And I made that one because I'm old. So you talked, I'm like, I've been in this hobby for way too long. And I was the one wiring up the VHOs and putting the ice cap ballast on. And I still remember a Tinic, and a Tinic made corals pop differently than royal blue and blue. So I wanted to introduce a light bar that's heavy violet for, number one, old school reefers that want to see that old school actinic pop, but also new school reefers. You take the blue, you take the actinic, you balance those out, and you can get a really nice broad-based coral fluorescence. So what I noticed is with more violet, my blue acros under the violet glow like you don't see with your traditional blue light bar. So I stumbled upon that, and I said I'm going to make one light bar that could be used by itself for reef applications. That's Reef Press Daylight. And then the Tropic Sun has a lot of it actually has a lot of warm white because I like looking at fish. So I want my color rendering index on this high. So people come over, and the first thing they talk about when the whites are on is, wow, this really has vibrant colors. And I am not afraid of a white tank. I mean, I got the Ushios blanging over there. So, that's my motivation. It is a Chinese-made light bar, so that's a knock that people have set against it. But I spent 1.5 years developing the spectrums and torture testing the lights. If you look at my Instagram, I took some Meso Blues and I lit my trees out front for Christmas, and I left the lights out there for 3 months, and they worked flawlessly through sleet, rain, you name it. So, yeah, that's where I'm at. It's not for everyone. Some people like to change their lights with the dial and the apps. This is old school, so I'm getting a lot of beginner reefers that are like, Luca, I am overwhelmed with these channels and stuff. And I'm like, what do you want to keep? Buy these 2 bars, plug them in, put them on a timer. You're done. Have a good day. So that's what we're doing there.
So it just seems like it's a simpler, more kind of plug and play LED than some of the other stuff that's out there. I mean, I know with my Mitras, it was overwhelming to me to get used to them because being a middle halide T5 guy and just plugging those fixtures in and just worrying about when they were coming on and going off, with all the different spectrum choices and the intensities and all that stuff, it definitely had me, it was confusing and overwhelming. But I think the key for me, and it seems like an important thing with LEDs is not to make a lot of changes to the spectrum or the intensity. Like you kind of like use. What I try to do is settle on a spectrum and intensity levels that I was satisfied with before I put corals in the tank. I'm kind of like a big. I don't like a very blue lit tank, and so a lot of the lighting profiles that I was getting were way too blue for me. So I have the Mitra lit tank in the same room as my display tank with the halides, and I'm looking at the halides and I'm looking at the blue like LEDs, and I'm like, I can't go there with the blue LEDs. So I did and actually Jim Graham Telegram did me a solid and came up with a spectrum that mimics the 400 watt 20K halides from my Mitras. So I think I don't know what your experience is, but I think that's what I've learned in my short time using LEDs is that it really doesn't pay to do a lot of tweaking. Maybe you tweak here and there, but to make a lot of changes along the way is probably not going to be beneficial to corals. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things I did is I have a spectrometer and I tested my Ushios, I tested 14K, I tested 20K, multiple different sources. And I will say that I designed these lights so like us halide guys, I can make a mix that looks like a 14K Phoenix. Like, boom, here you go. Because I do think that I respect people that are into the blue. I'm not hating. I mean, it's your hobby. You want to put pink lights in your tank. As long as it doesn't kill corals, I don't care. But I do like that classical, crisp, white blue where the colors in the fish pop. It's just something about it. So I hear you. And I know Telegram, I think, did he do the radium 20K, right? He imitated it.
It was a blend of 400 watt 20K Hamiltons and 250 watt 20K radium bulbs. That was kind of like the blend that
radium.
That's what the blend he came up with. Yeah, Chris from ACI makes a good point, but what it's not necessarily what we like to look at, but what's best for the corals, and so I think you got to look at the corals and see how they react in terms of the light. But listen, a lot of people love the blue light and they have kick-ass tanks, so it's not something I like to look at. But other people that run the full spectrum stuff, I'm more of a full spectrum guy. Have success as well. So I get there's a lot of factors in play. So speaking of Telegram, has he kicked the tires yet on the Quantum Pros? Has he dissected it and turned it inside out yet?
Yeah. So, I mean, to take these apart, you have to use a grinder saw. So I sent him some. I'm like, if you want to do it, that's fine. I use glass on these, not plastic, because it transmits more light at the thickness you can use glass at. However, me and Jim are friends, so I'm pretty open about that.
Full disclosure, right?
Yeah, the Instagram community did not take kindly to that, and they thought we were colluding because these power values can't be real, whatever it was. So actually, I talk to Jim all the time, and I was like, hey man, it's cool. You don't have to publish in the data. I do think I'm going to publish the data because I think the data is valid, and I think it's kind of exciting. But Jim might be setting up a tank. He might put it over there. He might compare the value compared to major brands of lights out there. And you're talking about comparing spectrum, coverage, and then also power, and then cost and whatever. So he, if you know Chris Clevin, he's the guy, the random flow generator guy. He took one and did some hilarious stuff where he was standing on it. He was like smashing this tree with it, and it was still working. And he took it apart. He used a blowtorch, I believe, to get the glass off because it's a high temp epoxy. But really simple. What I like about it is it's a simple chassis that's mass produced, and the only thing that's special about them are the lights inside, the LEDs. Is using unconventional LEDs. And to Chris's point, I do tell people, I'm like, if you want that ultra blue look, you can use my Mezzo Blues and OG Pops and I get it. But if you want to see growth and health, and if you have acros, if you have milliporas and things like that, put some white on there and just turn it on when you're not, if you hate white light, just turn it on when you're not there. And so, I am a full spectrum believer. I use 10K Ushios as my standard for all my growth trials. So yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at. I'm with you. I don't like the totally blue tank. When I first got into this, I was making my own light panels, and I was soldering in all the different LEDs, and I made one all blues because at that time that's all I heard. And when I turned it on, Keith, I was expecting to see like this revelation of my tank, and I'm like, this is not for me. Throw it out, start over.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, dude. So let's talk about the Kalk Slurry. You know, I think you've heard me talk about this before. You know, I find it, you know, it's something that seems risky to me, and I know that you wouldn't be doing it if you didn't think it was a risky proposition. So what I guess I want to know is what really, you know, pushed you into that you know, method in terms of using a slurry versus more traditional ways to dose Kalk water. Why the Kalk Slurry?
So I'm a calcium reactor guy, as you can probably guess. With this much tank space, you probably need something that's kind of economical. And so I have my calcium reactor. It's COVID. I'm a no name in the industry, so I can't call up Julian and get reborn when it's out of stock everywhere. So I'm crushing 44 pounds in it's fast, like it's months, right? It's not like I buy it and it's like lasts forever. I'm like going through it. And
the reborn you're talking about.
Yeah, the reborn, which is great stuff. Then they reformulated it. I got my hands on that, and I just personally, I'm not this bashing them. It wasn't for me. The new stuff wasn't for me.
It changed.
Yeah, and I sent some out. I dissolved some in hydrochloric, and I sent it out for ICP testing, and I confirmed what BRS was talking about the phosphates. So I don't know what the old stuff is. It might have been the same.
What was, just so everybody knows, I can't recall, what was BR saying about reborn and phosphate?
It was very measurable. You know, so it's all about how much do you dissolve in your sample. All I did is I took hydrochloric to dissolve a ton, and my phosphates were through the roof. It was like 5,000 parts per million or whatever it was. And I also sent in some calcium hydroxide and some 2-part to see if they had any in there, and there's like traces. So I was like, okay, it's significant. But I was fed up with the maintenance of a calcium reactor. I hate it. I worked in academia research, and when I was at UW Wisconsin, someone knocked over a CO2 cylinder. It broke the head off, and it shot through 3 concrete walls. And if someone in those rooms would got killed. So for me, if you have a calcium reactor, that's fine. I don't like the risk involved with highly pressurized CO2 in an enclosed space like a basement. I have kids. If they accidentally, I chained my CO2 bottle to my stand, but if they somehow knocked it over and it blew off the head and shot through and they died, I just wouldn't be able to sleep with that. And I actually started looking at the failure points of a calcium reactor, and I'm like, man, this is way too much. This is for me is a very risky proposition.
The calcium reactor.
You have these cheap regulators. You have this solenoid valve that hopefully works, but if it touches salt water, it doesn't work. You have the whole. You have a pump in there. You have to dose the pump in through it. And I was like, man, this is too expensive. I'm trying to cut costs. So I looked up Randy Holmes because he had a bunch of stuff. In 1991, he talked about calcium hydroxide, and one of the things he said was you could add it in dry form into the sump slowly on a daily basis. It would work. And so then I sent a post on the Reef to Reef, and I'm like, hey, Randy, I'm assuming you'd have boundary layer precipitation if the pH gets too high, if it's not agitated, blah, blah, blah. He walked me through all of his concerns. I pulled out my chemistry books. I started looking at the precipitation of magnesium, calcium, and any other traces. And so I said, okay, I'm going to formulate a new way of doing this. And here's the asterisk, because there's certain people that are pretty critical of my method. Engineers aren't deriving equations and things like that. They're taking existing things and they can apply it in a system that works. So I'm not here to prove that calcium hydroxide dissolves in salt water. It does. I don't need to prove that. I am very aware of the pH issues, so I have my pH probe in my sump, and at 8.7, it'll shut everything down because you could get precipitation. I have gyres on both sides of my sump that are offset and going like this, so it's swirling. The slurry drips in there. And by my measure, I have one dosing pump and one Jabo pump inside the slurry tank that has a ceramic shaft and ceramic bearings. And ceramic is it's about 1.5 harder on the Mohs scale, meaning the hydroxide will not destroy your ceramic shaft and bearings. So for my system, I have one dosing pump, which I think no one would argue is unreliable, and I have one Jabo wave maker that I think, as long as you take care of them, they work pretty good. That's my system. So if you want to call it risky, I will admit, if you don't know chemistry, you don't know how to make a solution, you don't know how to make sure you have proper agitation, proper turnover, you don't understand if you go above a certain pH, it's risky. And at first I said, Keith, no way is this risky. But then I get a lot of people on Instagram asking me tons of questions. They don't know the difference between a dose, like 20 mils of it, versus a flow rate, which is the 20 mils per minute. So then I had to recheck myself. And I actually think a lot of what we do is advanced, because I think the average population doesn't grasp very simple principles of chemistry. So I do dissuade people from doing this unless they're advanced. They have a ton of coral and they want to save a ton of money. So I have used Mississippi lime. I can get that before COVID for $20 for 50 pounds. And I had no contamination issues. I posted my ICP results because everyone's like, oh, you're going to poison your tank and everything like that. I posted that. I have switched over to Captivate's calcium hydroxide. It's really good stuff. My numbers are still great. I have never had in 1.3 years, I've never had an overdose. I've never had a catastrophic loss. I've never had a pump failure or a dosing pump failure. I haven't even changed my dosing tube on my comber in 1.5 years or however long, and I'm dosing Kalk slurry. I clean the tip where my stuff drips out. I make new solutions. I put my Jabo pump in vinegar every 4 months. And if you go on my Instagram page, I have 2 presentations in particular that show you how to set it up and talk about all the risks and talk about all the myths behind it. I do respect Chris Meckley and Chris Woods. They think it's pretty risky. I respect them. I'm not going to argue. However, for me, I think I got in contact with about 100 people that are doing this. It's working, and it's working really well.
So why not go with a more traditional, setup using like a Kalk stirrer or a drum and dose it? Why go with the slurry?
So super valid. And the first thing I asked them, everyone that's interested, I said, can you add enough alkalinity through regular Kalk, through your evaporation rates to meet your alk needs? If they say yes, I say, you're not using slurry, you're using the old school method. So for me, before this live stream, yesterday, I turned off my my Kalk slurry dosing pump for 12 hours, and it went down 1.5 DKH. So I'm at 3 DKH per day for 1,000 gallons. So for me, I can't evaporate enough water, Keith, to use traditional. And if I could, I will.
I hear you. So what I'm hearing is that this is really a way to dose Kalkwasser kind of like on steroids if you're not using a calcium reactor. Or if you're using a calcium reactor and you want to dose Kalkwasser, then the slurry will allow you to get to where you want to get if you can't do that via the evaporation that you're getting from your tank.
Precisely. Yep.
Gotcha.
So whatever. Jim made the breakthrough on the Jabo pump. I really had this crazy idea to dose it, and I was making all these ridiculous mixers and stuff like that. But if I'm going to set up one of my 12-foot troughs as Acropora and just SPS, and I'm going to have to go slurry on that one. The other one's going to be LPS, and the surface area is going to exceed, the evaporation rate will exceed my alk demand. And Keith, I'm going to the same setup as you have. I'm going to have a 50 or a 75 or 100 gallon system. I'm going to put the calcium hydroxide in. I'm going to mix it up. I'm going to use the floating suction line like you and Chris have talked about, and I'm going to use that for that system because I want to show people that this is a very valuable and useful method. But for my aquapora system, yeah, I do want to go Kalk Slurry.
Question for you about the slurry. Do you swap it out at all, or do you just let it ride in terms of just replenishing it?
So I do a batch process. I fill it up. I let it draw down to the very bottom, and I fill it up. And every 4 months, when I clean the pump, I draw it down, and I take the whole thing, take it outside, hose it all off, get my muriatic acid, hydrochloric acid. I put in a bug sprayer. It's not concentrated, it's dilute. Clean it all off, shine it all back up, Keith, and I put it back downstairs.
Yeah, I every 2 months I clean out my drums in terms of my caulk washer to get that sediment out there because you just don't know in terms of the contaminants that might build up. So yeah, you're definitely getting confirmation from Chris that it's a little too scary for him in terms of using the slurry. Not saying it doesn't work for Luke. It's just not me. Have too much invested.
He's and I think in a year I'm going to drive down there and I'm going to make him an ultimate Kalk slurry machine, and I think he's going to go for it. Joking aside, I will say that I do have heavy mechanical filtration on my tank, and I think you saw my video where I have those mats of poly that my water goes through. So one of the things is I don't have any contaminants, so to speak, that you would associate with the calcium hydroxide fallout. Now, some of this is because the solubility of these are very low once they get in that precipitated form. And if you're keeping your pH high, Keith, your solubility of aluminum stuff goes really low. So it's actually funny. The calcium hydroxide does have contaminants in it, but the calcium hydroxide keeps your tank pH high. So it actually limits the dissociation of these elements. And so I do find my aluminum levels are at the natural dissociation levels at that pH level. So I have about 11 micrograms per liter. But what's interesting is I filter out the sediment religiously because it could be trapped in there, and if something happened wrong, it could release it. So I'm taking that out. The other thing I'm doing is I don't use DI. I'm big in testing theories, and I started evaluating my RODI system, and if you use ICP testing from ATI, they test your RO water. So I took my DI system off, and there's nothing bad in it except for silicates. And guess what Kalk precipitates out? Silicates. So my water that I do my large water changes, my top off, has 2,000 milligrams per liter silicates. And my reef tank water, my last ICP, they told me I need to start dosing silicates because it's only at 90. So it's amazing to me when you dose calcium hydroxide slurry into the tank, your silicate problem goes away, your phosphates are going to drop, and I'm not seeing the metals accumulation. And I'm in this over a year. So I was okay with people previously saying, dude, this is not going to work and blah, blah, blah. I was nervous as shit. I'm not going to lie. Pardon my French. I'm sitting there sending out ICPs every 3 weeks. I'm dead scared. I'm like, this could really happen, blah, blah, blah. And now I send them out, and I'm I use Captivate's trace elements, the MT trace or whatever, to score a 99 on the ATI ICP test. You have to basically have perfect everything. I'm routinely between 98 and 99 in those tests. So at least what science can measure, it appears it's not having a detrimental effect on my aquarium. That's all I can offer.
Yeah, so you just mentioned that you use the Captivate aquaculture traces. You talked about the Captivate caulk washer. So you and I have something in common. I've just started using all that stuff, as well as their salt. and Chris Meckley turned me on to all their stuff. Yeah, there you go. That's the Kalk
this is their salt bucket.
That's their salt bucket.
No, this what he does for me, because I do 180 gallons. He mixes it up, so I dump this in and put my stuff in there, and it's ready to go.
Oh yeah, it's a 4-part salt mix, so it that makes it a little easier. What's how long have you been using the Captivate salt? I've been using it a full week.
Oh wow! So I've been working with Chris for I think over a year. So actually, this is their old dry mix stuff, which they would send me, and you'd have to slowly put this in the water because it would boil the water. This is the dry mix, and I'd source my own sodium chloride. Now he has gone to the 4-part. I'm almost through my huge order I placed with him. It's only going to get better because it's going to be easier to use.
Yeah.
I have to say that this is the cleanest salt I've ever used.
It's clean.
I used to work for Cargill, and I worked in their salt division. It's kind of weird how all this works together. I was a chemical engineer at their premier salt plant, which makes all of their high-grade salts. And so I just called up Cargill, and I'm like, hey, how do I find a distributor so I can buy your salt? Because I know I want the high-grade, blah, blah, blah. So I'm getting pharmaceutical-grade salt for retail restaurant-grade prices. I'm mixing it with pharma-grade salt mix, and my cost with the volumes I buy is no different than buying Red Sea, the blue bucket, or even could be approaching Instant Ocean per gallon. I've been super happy with it, and again, I'm going to support the small guy because I'm a small guy, and I get direct support from that man, and he is a true genius. So I ask him questions, he guides me, and I've been nothing but satisfied. I try to get all the reefers that come over. I keep this right here, and I try to introduce all the reefers. If there's one thing you get from me, just if you don't want to waste money on trace elements, this little bottle for the price they charge is the equivalent of like 100 gallons of some of the major brands. I'm not going to say them, for the same price. So why wouldn't you get people on this?
Yeah, when I had Chris on, he just had there was just a lot of information to dissect. It was a great discussion, and yeah, I had a similar experience with him in terms of dealing with him about my systems. He's very willing to help and to help guide and provide advice. So it's my journey is just kind of beginning with the Captivate products, but so far I'm really digging it. And I used to use Instant Ocean salt, and that was like probably the dirtiest salt I'd ever mixed up. And I had to take my saltwater mixing drum out and frickin' blast it with a power washer before I made the switch over to the Captivate salt. And so I spent a good couple hours just trying to blast out all that Instant Ocean nasty residue stuff. So I got it about as clean as I could. But yeah, it cleans up really, really clear. And I love the fact that I don't have to do any testing in terms of key parameters in that mix, because if you mix it correctly, then it's going to mix up perfectly in terms of all the key parameters. So it's something to not have to worry about, right? I mean, you've got all these stories going on in terms of this salt or that salt, and these different manufacturer glitches where you've got certain issues with the salt, here and there, and I mean, I had great experiences using IO, and I'm not knocking IO, but you never know when you have a mass-produced salt like that in terms of what kind of batch you're going to get and what kind of hand you're going to be dealt with. So, and I've had different concentrations of magnesium from batch to batch, and one time it was like a really, really low, concentration of magnesium. So, the price of the salt is not, it's more expensive than the major brands of salt out there. Mm-hmm. But I don't have to dose magnesium when I'm mixing it up because it's already there. So you're kind of saving money on that end.
Yeah, Keith, I'm interested to hear, because with the liquid solution, it must be really quick and easy. Is that a correct assumption?
For me, it maybe takes 10 minutes to mix up 40 gallons of it.
Not bad.
So,
Bad.
it's not as plug and play as the instant ocean salt, but
No.
it's but there's a reason why it's in 4-part. And ESV is a 4-part salt too, and I used to use that with great
Good
success.
stuff.
Yeah.
I'd probably be remiss. I try to give credit where credit's due, and I try not to be influenced by things. Brightwell has a very nice salt. It uses anhydrous materials, which are very high purity. So I have never tried Brightwell, but I do think I'm going to try it in the future because it seemingly is also made with very good ingredients. But here's the problem, Keith. So when you blend mixes of salt, it's very hard to get a perfect mix. And let's say we start a salt company. We're mixing this and it's perfect. The problem is you drive on trucks and you're shipping across the country. What happens is you get stratification. And so when a hobbyist goes in there and scoops out, I'm going to make 10 gallons. They make 10 gallons and they say, hey, look at how low the magnesium is. Then they make another 10 gallons. They say, what the hell? This magnesium is coming up. By the bottom of the thing, like the magnesium's way high. So it's possible, but I do like that Brightwell does make convenient sizes because I personally I don't want to use anything but the whole contents because you get stratification. And so for trace elements especially, you're talking about little specks in a sea of salt. Mm. If you take a scoop, you might miss both those little specks, and now you have none of those trace elements. And the next scoop, you have double. So I do like the liquid method because it's an ionic solution and there is no separation. That is a homogeneous solution. So for you using Captivate in your home, you are getting the perfect mix of all the elements compared to a pre-mixed dry salt that's used intermittently.
Yep. So, Luca, in your bio, I mentioned that you like to assess, certain assumptions in the hobby, and we've talked about some stuff in terms of things that you've kind of looked at and studied in terms of the, some not so conventional methods in terms of the Kalk slurry, and you've got your own, lighting solution. So, what else, man? What else have you kind of wanted to kick the tires on and turn, take a look at and dig a little bit deeper into in terms of certain accepted principles and practices in the reef keeping hobby that maybe you weren't totally buying into?
Yeah, I will say.
I won't say not buying into. Let's just say that you kind of wanted to dig a little bit deeper in terms of why those certain assumptions had been made.
Yeah, so I think it's a cool question. And I'm not saying that I'm pioneering this, but
you're a curious guy.
No rock. I'm a curious guy, and this TSA. I think TSA was the first person to do this, and if they're not, I'm sorry, whoever invented this idea, the PVC racking. So I'm getting really obsessed with flow, and I'm realizing how limiting our current flow options are. And people are like, what are you talking about, Luca? This is ridiculous. But I'm talking about going that next layer down. So you're looking at flow for SPS. What are the different types of flow? You have the incoming tide, the outgoing tide, you have wave action, you have all these things. And so I bought the Hydros wave engine, and I crashed my unit, and it was broken. I sent it back to Carlos from CoralView. He goes, Luca, how many schedules did you load in this thing? And he's like, it doesn't matter. I'm like, I completely disagree, Carlos. If you set up asymmetrical, so this tank unfortunately has a ton of JBOs in here because I just got my unit back. I have 3 gyres in there, and they're asymmetrically placed. There's 2 on this wall, and they're kind of angled, and they're off center. There's one on the back wall, on the other side wall, that's off center. And I found through testing, if you start doing different flow patterns with the physics of the tank, so instead of just having all this flow working against each other, actually have strategic flows moving, you can create far more random flow inside the tank. So people assume you put flows on both sides of your tank and you put them on random and it's going to be super random flow. It really isn't, because you're fighting the flows, and as random as it is, it's the same thing, just trying to change the speeds. So if you can actually take truly random flow and have it different ways. So I can do gyro on mine, roll it. I can do countercurrent. I call it toilet, like a toilet. It's rotating like around in a circle. You can do opposing heads that are angled, and it creates these riffles and these flutters in the water. So Carlos, so here's a huge shout out to Hydros. And again, I borrow stuff for retail price. I'm not getting paid to say this. Carlos is like, okay, I can kind of buy into it. I still think you're crazy, but I respect it. He's like really cool about it, right? His next revision on the software is going to allow me to put in 400 schedules. Now, I'm never going to use that many, or he said it was something crazy. I can't remember what it was. But it's like that. Allow me, if you already have the software, can you please allow me to do more things than what you're allowing everyone to do? I would actually I'd like to have a 3-dimensional graph of the 3 pumps where you vary the flow and you can make an hour segment and you can cut them and paste them into a visual flow pattern. Because my whole thing, I guess, Keith, is if you truly introduce a new dimension to flow, what happens to detritus buildup, to coral growth, to fish health? Now the fish are getting different flows all the time. I'm talking to a biz right now. Do they have any high-end electronic control valves? We could actually start getting multi-directional flow on huge adductors to get that gyro mode. So I'm really experimenting on those 6-foot by 12-foot flats that are going to be over 2 foot deep. Chris Meckley told me, Luca, don't make them too shallow. He is so right. You can develop so many different flow patterns the deeper you go. And so I'm really going to try to reassess flow and what can I learn from it is really where I'm at right now.
Yeah, no, flow is very, very important for SPS. That is certainly a key to success. Another question that you had actually mentioned to me that you wanted to make sure that I asked you this question, and that question is biggest failures, right? So you've done a lot of tinkering in this hobby. What have been some of your biggest failures in terms of that tinkering? Or maybe it's not been tinkering. Maybe it was like stuff that you were doing that you thought was like on solid ground.
So I think if you're really open about your successes, you should be open about your failures. And I have failed a lot. So when I went from my original 65 gallon, I went to the 250 right here. And I had a 250, I had a sump in the back, and it was like growing. I mean, Keith, it was truly insane. It was something to behold. I was loving it. I had no apex. It was just growing corals like crazy. I was using Kalk wasser as much as I could for evaporation, and I had a calcium reactor. I had no idea that it was boosting pH. I had just, all right, Kalk, and then I'll use a calcium reactor. Then I added, this is the dumbest, I am embarrassed about this. I built a rack. You know, storage racks, those like metal storage racks? I got one, and I put 4 low boys on top of each other. So it was like you had room, and then you had room, theoretically. And I'm a young reefer, and so I get these things going. Low boys were a real hassle, anyways. They suck, they leak, and all that stuff. But anyways,
yeah, they do.
I have one pump going up to the top one, and it is cascading the water all the way down. I'm like, dude, these reefers out here, these aquaculturists, wasting all this energy, idiots. I'm going to show them I got this eco mode, right? And I put gyres in there. And actually, to this day, the most successful SPS tank I ever had was my second down low boy. It literally grew the best corals I've ever grown in my life. But here's the problem. For a while, I had detritus build up. I couldn't even barely clean the top one. I couldn't barely get it down to the bottom one. My knees are hurting. There's springing leaks. I mean, there's salt water. The overflows I put in would clog with algae, and I'd come home and there'd be water overflowing. My wife was like, I'm going to sledgehammer this whole system. So I would actually say that my first attempt at aquaculture, while the corals were beautiful for about a year, it was an utter failure. It was so bad that I got desperate. I put the flats in the basement, took all the corals out of my entire system, shut it down, ripped out the entire rack, all the plumbing, the sump, I mean, literally everything, built a new system that you just saw. in 3 days. I didn't sleep. I should have done like crack or something because I was dead. And I transferred all back. It was, you know, if you're going to do something like that, it has to be bad. I was really convinced that all my low boys were going to fracture completely and I was going to lose my entire system and I was going to probably get divorced from my wife. So I did it all. My buddy helped me and we replumbed an entire 1,000-gallon system in 3 days, remounted all the corals, did everything. And it was so embarrassing to me. And then my second largest failure is I showed you that little 65 I still have. I had a small overflow on it, and it overflowed 7 times. 7 times. And I'm like, honey, this is the last time I fixed it. I
promise.
So I finally dropped the level. Coral's in there. Got my drill out. Zeke put a 2-inch hole in it, loaded with corals and water, replumbed the 2-inch overflow on that thing live, and it worked. And I didn't lose any of my corals. I used the old way I used to ship acros was in wet newspaper and shit. Yeah. That's how we used to receive them back in the day. I wrapped my entire tank in paper towels and newspaper, and I put a little pump that was just dribbling water over it while I did this idiotic thing, putting glass shavings everywhere in my tank. I mean, completely stupid.
How long were they with the wet paper or with the wet towels over them for? 2 hours?
2 to 3 hours. And then I had to get some special socks to get the glass pieces out. So those are my biggest failures. Probably some of the most humbling things is when you think you are onto something, you know, Keith, like you're truly onto something, and you're so wrong. It's almost like stupid. So my calcium reactor, I took a cold palmer from our company, and I used a $2,000 pump, and I was metering in the water for the CO2 for the calcium reactor. I'm like, I got something better. I'm going to gravity flow it because then gravity never fails, and I'll have constant flow rate. And I made this adjustable stand tube, okay? So the water would flow into it, it'd overflow out of it, but you could adjust it so you could adjust the head pressure going in the calcium reactor so you could adjust your flow. Well, guess what? You get a little accumulation of detritus in there, it stops working. So I was literally adjusting this thing every single day, and I'm like, what am I? I am so dumb. So I got the peristaltic pump back in. So there's been a lot of that. My first 6 months on Calk Slurry was complete failures. I'd try to make agitators that were out of the water because the calcium hydroxide is aggressive. They would stop. One started smoking. My wife's like, something smells bad in here. I mean, you name it. I've never blown up a tank.
Have you only had one marriage, or are you on your second?
One marriage. She's a keeper. She's a keeper, Keith. She also knows. I think a lot of us though in this industry though, or hobby, I should say, we might have hyperactivity. We might have obsessive compulsive. We might just be a serious nerd. But she knows that this is kind of therapy for me, and it keeps me grounded from doing worse things like driving fast motorcycles again or going to the bars. So she's actually pretty good with it. That makes sense.
Yeah. No, I hear you. So what's out there right now in terms of products that you think can be improved upon? I mean, obviously you've tried to be an innovator and come up with stuff that you think has, I'm not going to say fallen short and all that sort of thing, but what would you like to kind of see out there that, whatever kind of product it is that could potentially have, there could be some sort of innovation involved where it could be made better. Is there anything out there that you think that could be improved upon?
Yeah, I do. And there's a couple ways to look at this. Like a simple improvement, I would say, is if you're a new hobbyist, don't get a rimless tank. Go buy an Aqueon cheap tank and save yourself some money. For me, innovation might mean simplicity. So I don't get all these high-end tanks when an old school tank is going to give you a beautiful reef. But for me, for products, what I see, and a couple people have talked about this, spend less of your money on marketing and spend more of your money on the product, or if you're making food for corals, get some science behind it, maybe, or just whatever you can possibly do. Like, hey, we set up 14 tanks. 7 of them had our product, 7 didn't. And we measured the 20 corals in each tank every 2 months for a year, and here's the results. This is why you should buy our product. That's just one idea. I think innovation might mean more to me. Use what actually works and get rid of some of the snake oil and the things like that. Like, the one that bothers me the most, and it's a safe topic because it's cool now, so I'm not going to get flamed on it. I will tell you, Keith, when you challenge status quo, it's a different world, and people they're personally attached to these things, and they get angry at you. And it's weird because you're presenting an idea. And I joke with some of the other people that do this. It's like we're in the Middle Ages getting stoned for thinking the Earth is round. And sometimes the Earth isn't round, we were wrong. But I do look at innovation. I think if we think back 10 years ago, equipment in general, in my opinion, lasted longer. In fact, I still have ATI fixtures from I don't even know when. I had to buy new plexiglass because the plexiglass got so old, and it still works. My 65-gallon is older than a 30-year-old, and it still works. I don't know if acrylic is the answer for a lot of stuff. So, you know, the longevity of things. I guess the biggest innovation I would be looking at is flow. I'm watching the biz. I think Jabo offers zero innovation. They're just copying a worn-out design. If I'm being open, I think big companies like Ecotech should start looking at next generation flow machines. How can you completely change the game? There's so many different ways to do that. And someone like Ecotech with the resources and their level of quality and their level of engineering, I look for them to take us there. Okay, you have a lot of money. I shouldn't say that. You have resources to a lot of money for engineering relative to a lot of companies. I would love to see that. I think we're scratching the surface on the innovation space in bacteria. And I'm gonna get flamed for this, but you ask any ICP company to show you their validation on the accuracy of their stuff. You're going to be hearing crickets, except for 2 manufacturers, and I use one of them. And even they will say the accuracy of this stuff isn't precise. So if you're out there, if this is the only thing you take away from this talk with Luca Martino, ICP is not absolute. Is it good? Yes. Do I like to use it because it's better than the other options? But compared to lab certified tested methods, to test your reef tank, it costs about $5,000. They're not at that level. I'd like to see innovation in the fact that get us a $65 to $70 test kit, testing method, whatever you're doing, however you do it, you send it off, and you actually can say, here's our accuracy and here's our resolution. So if I send you 10 samples of salt water, it will be within these limits on all my tests. Right now, I can tell you without a doubt, because I like to waste my money, I sent my tank water captured the same way. I go cap down, invert, fill, rinse, cap down, invert, fill, with rubber gloves on, nitrile gloves, seal it off. I sent them to all the major ones. I didn't have any one that matched either one on all the elements. There was, literally one test kit said I had no iron. The other test kit said I need to do a 50% water change because I was at danger of losing corals. So I think the biggest innovation is the realization that our testing is better, but it's not good. Look at innovation there, and then let's get that microbiome stuff figured out for sure. To people's points, give us a play-by-play, what's good, what isn't. Let's see some research, a little bit of research behind it. I don't know how to do that. And help us get a good biome in our tank. Right now, I can go and get bacteria cultures, okay? You can get Dr. Tim's, you can get the Brightwell, you can get all these different places. Keith, guess what? Last time I checked, lactobacillus, a.k.a. probiotics, a.k.a. bacteria that used to grow in milk, I don't know if there's any scientific reason why you do be adding these to your tank, and I can tell you that they all have them. It's like, come on, man. You want to know? Come on, man. It's like, don't be selling people stuff that has no business being in a saltwater aquarium. And it was interesting. I actually started taking probiotics from my company and throwing in my water, and I get the same pH response. I get the same ORP response as these products. And then we finally just streaked them and said, what the hell? But I'm not going to publish that because I don't need the backlash. I'm not here to convince people. If they think that I'm a villain and that this company is Jesus, keep thinking that. I don't need that. I can tell personally, I don't see why you'd be adding probiotics that are consumed by humans into a saltwater aquarium. Last time I checked, they're not very similar, and most likely they're not applicable. Here's the problem. The probiotics, as we know them in saltwater, I'll challenge you to find any fermenter in the world that can reliably produce these in a manufacturing setting that would be cost effective. I'm looking at some of those species. I'm like, good luck, man. They don't even know how to grow these in a sterile environment because they think they need other bacteria to interact with to live. So I think that's one innovation, and I'd probably say the last is I like people like you that are taking time out of your day to have people on, to experience new ideas, to learn from each other. I think the innovation I'd like to see is step back from your assumed behaviors, and I'm going to talk about the forums. Whoa, I don't even go there anymore. Step back from your assumptions. This is no different than politics. Sometimes I cannot have a constructive conversation with someone that's sponsored in the industry about something that take the brands away. Step back. Why don't we start having those conversations again? So a new reefer does.
Yep. Luca, you still there, man? He froze in mid-thought.
Am I on?
Oh, now you're back. Can you hear me?
Well, it was probably I was talking too much. I'm sorry, I talk a lot. But yeah, Keith, I was just saying about if we could all step back from preconceived notions and maybe just actually talk about what reefers really need and innovate towards that space. So Instagram, let's start posting content about ideas and concepts. And so when a new reefer comes in, he doesn't just see these macro shots of tenuous, but he sees, hey, Keith had a guest on that's talking about this. Look at, here's Chris Meckley. Like, what's interesting to me is like people that have high viewerships in this in this line of duty. Then you come across someone like Chris, who I've learned so much from, yet he has limited viewership. So how do we get those people, like Chris Woods? You had him on, Keith. I'm sorry, but if people didn't learn more in that guy knows much. How do we get people like that more in the spotlight, helping people understand things? And the realization is, if you're working for a company, you're going to present a biased opinion. And I don't think the average human knows that. So they're like, hey, I keep hearing that if I put this Turbo Lax 5000 in my tank, it's going to grow corals. If I'm a new reefer, I might say, hey, that's cool, I'm going to buy it. But it would be cooler if they're hearing about, here's why you want to use calcium hydroxide, here's how you want to do this. Hey, here's the things that work. And maybe even like companies coming, maybe reassessing their product lines and saying what is snake oil and what isn't, and let's maybe divest some of that.
I agree with you, man. I think that, and I've talked about this a couple of times. I came out of the media business, and so I was working for CNN and Turner Broadcasting for like 21 years or what have you, and I was in advertising research, and we used a lot of data. We used Nielsen for TV ratings. We used other data sources for internet digital type of data, and with the digital explosion happening in the last number of years, there was a lot of different data sources out there to measure media and a lot of different companies that were measuring digital outlets that people were consuming, and it was like the Wild West. So there's a governing body in the media business called like the Media Ratings Council, and they're like an impartial third party that evaluates and certifies methodologies. So they just roll up their sleeves and they take a good hard look at the practices, the principles, how the data is derived. You know, is it on solid ground? Is it something that you know is you know, might be saying something, but it's probably something that you can't be too confident in terms of the what the data is saying. I would love to see something like that, you know, in this business.
Love it.
I think that would, and I realize there's a lot of challenges, right, in terms of being able to fund some sort of organization that's an independent third party where you can get a certification for your product, where you can get this stamp of approval that, you know, you have full disclosure and that things are, you know, what you say they are, and that the consumers can have confidence in the products. You know, there's just too many products out there right now where you don't have enough disclosure. There's not a lot of information on the labels in terms of what the ingredients are all about. So I kind of agree with you in that sense, and I think there should be more full disclosure in the reef keeping marketing ecosystem.
Can I? So I love it, and you know, Keith, here's where I get concerned. So you come from an impressive background, and you have large corporations that have money. In the aquarium space, what I struggle with is, in relative to other industries, let's talk about the food industry, which I'm in currently. The market's like $1 trillion for food. I mean, it's massive. I have access to a lot more because you can reach a lot more households. So what I struggle with is, how would you be able to do this with these companies that might not have the fiscal resources for engineering or for scientific studies? I'll tell you what, I certainly do not have money to put into scientific studies to tell you that my Mezzo Blue bar is better than A, B, and C.
Yeah.
However, I do agree with you, and I directionally like it, and it's almost like if this organization. So in food safety, we use SQF, Safe Quality Foods. They audit you and they help you become safer at making your product. And what's interesting is I can afford to pay that bill. Okay, $4,000. They come in, but the outputs that they give me from their findings and their audit give me 100, 200, maybe even $1 million in either reduced risk, product quality improvements, whatever. So if we could take that governing body, Keith, and turn it into an audit system where, let's say it's Mahina Corals and we're making version 2.0 lights, and I finally got some cash flow, and I'm like, yeah, I got $2,000. And these people come out and say, hey, you know, this power source, you might want to look at a different one because, you know, in our experience, this isn't as good. You have some sharp edges which could cut some consumers, and, you know, A, B, and C, whatever it is. That's how you can get there. So where I think the proposition is the leaders in the industry, instead of talking, you know, in their separate channels, how can we get a consortium? Is that the right word? Consortium of scientists, engineers, industry experts, expert reefers. We need to get them in the discussion. You know, and like, I don't mean talking heads in a bad way, because I guess I'm a talking head in Instagram. You're a talking head. You have a ton of connections. You have a ton of information. How do we sit and, instead of all talking about it, how do we start making a framework and invite all the big companies in, invite the BRSs in and say, hey man, help us out with this. And then how can we all wrap our hands around this and propose something that's going to add value to the manufacturer and add value to the end consumer? And if you do that, you are going to have a self-sustaining system that's going to rock it out. And in fact, you're going to go from, oh my God, to wanting, please come into my facility. I want to make this better. And and now we're making a better product, and it's actually a badge of honor. Like, I'm certified by ReefBum Academy.
It's like, a grading system for restaurants, right? You want to have that A+ hanging in your window, not the D.
Yeah. Not the D.
So, Great Bearded Reef Paul, man, thank you so much, dude, for that super chat. Paul's also the moderator. Another great guest, Keith. Thanks for providing us all a place to congregate weekly. Much appreciative. Thanks for all the insight, Luca. All right, dude. Wow. Luca, so man, let's wrap it up. Any final thoughts before we sign off tonight? You want to plug anything besides the lights, the Instagram?
I want to plug you. I keep encouraging. I find your conversations extremely refreshing. I think there's too much of the same old on the mainstream YouTube stuff. I love how you're sponsored, but you're talking about all these dynamic things. So I appreciate your courage. I appreciate your ability to interview people, and I just want you to keep doing what you're doing. And I think there's a lot more people doing these types of things, and I think this is the path forward. And I'm just applaud you. Thank you for having me on. And I'm going to keep doing weird shit in my house, and I'll keep you guys posted on Instagram.
All right, cool, Luca. Well, listen, man, I really enjoyed the conversation tonight. So, again, thanks for taking the time. So that's going to do it, folks, for this live stream. I want to thank Luca for being a guest on today's stream, and also want to thank, again, Bulk Reef Supply and Ecotech Marine for supporting this stream. And thanks to all you folks out there that had tuned in and contributed via Super Chat. So also want to remind everybody that all episodes of Rappin With ReefBum can be found as podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, as well as Amazon. I want to thank Paul. Big thank you to Paul, Great Bearded Reef, for moderating tonight. My next Rappin With ReefBum live stream will be next Thursday, July 14th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, with Dong Zhou from Acro Garden. Dong is a coral farmer in the Boston, Massachusetts area, and he has just some amazing stuff. I've visited his place a few times. He's been propagating corals for years, so that should be another great show. And if you want to check out the full upcoming schedule of guests on Rappin With ReefBum, visit reefbum.com under the YouTube section. So until next time, be safe and be well, and later.